Our first speaker, he is the speaker of IDF, Iranian Democracy Front. He has more than 33 years experience in political activities, and he's the chairman of Iranian Solidarity Congress. He's been governor of Kerman and Fars and Minister of Interior of Iran. Please help me welcome Dr. Nasre-Esfahani.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. On behalf of the Iranian Democracy Front, I welcome you to this event to honor Cyrus the Great, who was one of the most important persons in Iran. It is great to see you, so many friends with us tonight. And we are especially happy to see friends who have come from all over the world, Europe, Canada, and different cities in the United States. I thank all distinguished guests, all guests and special distinguished. In addition, Dr. Hamzapur that I mentioned for setting up this program, many friends have been involved in preparing for tonight's event, that I thank all of them sincerely. I am grateful for the effort of Mr. Batmanovich, who was one of the main founders of the Solidarity Congress 7 years ago. And in addition to, a special thank go to Mr. Mousavi and Mr. Sarshar, and many others which I cannot name all of them. This event is possible only and only because of the commitment and the tremendous commitment of Dr. Alaqbandian, and I thank him sincerely for his great dedication. Cyrus the Great has a very special place in Iranian history. He was a very successful leader whose wisdom has been recognized by the scholar and the historian, as you will see on the speech of Dr. Kaveh Farrokh. Cyrus understood the importance of the human right 2,500 years ago. And it is tragic that today the rights of the Iranian people are brutally violated by the regime that does not understand human rights. And the human right definition is quite different from the human right that we know. The member of the Iranian Democracy Front, with the abbreviation IDF, Cyrus the Great and are committed to the honor of the Cyrus the Great, and this organization is committed, I repeat, committed to effort to replace the Islamic Republic with the democratic government, the government of the people, for the people, and by the people. We will cooperate. When I mean we, I mean that all members of the IDF. We will cooperate with any other organization who seek the democracy in Iran. And any cooperation of them is welcome. To bring freedom, democracy, human rights, and to Iranian people. As a member of the Iranian Democracy Front, I would like to speak with you about some important issues regarding Iran and the Iranian democracy movement, especially the movement. Issues related to Iran are discussed in the news reports every day. There are frequent reports by the human rights organization about pro-democracy Iranians who are imprisoned by the Islamic Republic. And you have read recently about Nasre-Esfahani. There are reports about the lack of the freedom in Iran and the censorship. This is one of the policy of the regime, censorship. There are reports about the terrorist activities of the regime. There are reports about the problem between the International Atomic Energy Agency and the regime. There are reports about high unemployment, sky-high inflation, collapse of the Iranian currency, and increasing poverty, and so on and so on and so on. The leader of a legitimate regime does not present at all the Iranian people. And Iranians don't support the dangerous policy and the terrorist activities of Islamic Republic. Violation of human rights, lack of the freedom of speech, and the lack of freedom of the pro-democracy political party have caused a strong resentment in millions and millions of Iranians. Massive organized corruption and gross mismanagement have seriously damaged Iran's economy and caused great discontent, especially among millions of young Iranians who are unemployed. Unemployment among the young Iranians is more than 30%. More than 30%. The annual inflation rate is more than 40%. While the personal income of the most Iranian is stagnant, especially income for the retired people, resulting in a persistent decline in the standard of living. The purchase power of the household in Iran is declining every day, even every hour. The Iranian currency has lost 99%. Yes, you heard right, 99% of its value since creation of Islamic Republic as a result of the saving and as a result of the saving of the millions of Iranians have been eroded and in some cases totally vanished. These economic problems have resulted in millions of Iranians now living under the poverty line, a relative line and absolute line. And there are serious social and medical consequences. While the Iranian people have been impoverished, the leaders, so-called leaders of the Islamic Republic and their relatives have been plundering Iranian national wealth. The regime spent hundreds of millions of dollars for the international terrorism all around the world. The regime adventurous policies and meddling the other countries endanger the national interest of Iranian people. The regime has interfered in many countries, including Lebanon, Egypt, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Turkey, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The regime uses the terrorists as one of the policy tools, and its support the terrorists will continue as long as the regime exists. We don't expect that the terrorism stop while the regime exists. The Constitution of Islamic Republic is seriously flawed, and it is one of the reasons for the uncivilized policy and the law and the action of the regime. Since creation of Islamic Republic in 1979, the Iranian people have suffered terribly, but Iranians have had much better period in their long history when Iran was prosperous and successful. Iranians have made a great contribution to the world civilization for thousands of years. Prominent Iranian poets, mathematicians, and scientists include Rumi, Omar Khayyam, Saadi, Ferdowsi, Hafiz, Nizami, and Avicenna. There are many successful Iranians in Europe, Canada, Silicon Valley, and other parts of the United States. They include leaders in global technology companies such as Google, Yahoo, Intel, Cisco, eBay, medical professionals in the major hospitals, university professors like Dr. Kavi Farrokh, that he will be the main speaker tonight, and we are very proud of him, businessmen, and many others. The success of so many Iranians around the world is the clear indication that the Iranian people can and will rebuild the Iranian economy when the Islamic Republic is replaced by a responsible democratic government. Various individuals and the government in Europe and the United States have suggested options for resolving the problems that are caused by the Islamic Republic. In lieu of the Iranian Democracy Front, IDF, the only option, I emphasize, the only option that has the real possibility of success is to actively support the movement of Iranian for freedom and democracy. This is not an easy solution, I know that, but it is most feasible and least expensive one. Some people inside and outside Iran believe the claim of the leader of the Islamic Republic that the regime can be reformed. This is a big lie. And has wasted of time, energy, and financial resources of opposition abroad. The brutal and the repressive action of the regime in the past few years have clearly demonstrated that the freedom and the democracy are not possible with this option, and are not possible in the framework of the Islamic Republic. The Iranian people want freedom, democracy, and human rights, and they realize that they cannot be free as long as Islamic Republic exists. The massive protests in Iran in 2009 and 2011 show that the millions of Iranians oppose the Islamic Republic, and the regime is vulnerable. They are today, there is a historic opportunity. I emphasize on that today is different from the last year and 2 years ago and 10 years ago. There is a opportunity to support cause of the freedom and democracy in Iran and eliminate the horrendous problem caused by the Islamic Republic. Despite the regime's brutal campaign against the pro-democracy activity, many Iranians inside and outside Iran continue the effort to bring freedom and democracy to Iran. A member of IDF, which I am very proud. I am very proud that I am a member of that organization, جبهه هماهنگ مبارزان ایران, prepared the roadmap. The roadmap for the democracy movement. By roadmap, I mean roadmap, which include organizational and structural plan, unity process project, immediate transition plan, especially security after the collapse of the regime, rebuilding Iran project, and most important, which I announced today, is operational project. We have the operational project prepared and will execute by the experts, which they are not member of the JEPE or IDF. Just a dozen of the other countries have transitioned a democracy in the past 20 years. Iranian also can and will replace the Islamic Republic with a democratic government. And the process will be much faster with the active international support. IDF does not seek any financial support from any governments. However, we hope that the democratic countries will provide moral, political, and technological support to the people of Iran and their movement for freedom and democracy. A democratic Iran will be an important factor in peace and the security of the region and the world. I look forward to the day when the Iranian people replace the Islamic Republic with a responsible democratic government, and I hope that day you, all of you, will join us to celebrate the victory of the Iranian people. Since this event will be seen by the people inside Iran, I would like to say a few words to Iranian people in Persian. درود بر ملت بزرگ ایران و تمام فرزندان خلف کوروش. کوروش بزرگ پایه‌گذار فرهنگی شد که هنوز پس از 2500 سال پابرجاست و بر تارک تاریخ جهان می‌درخشد. گرچه در طول تاریخ پرنشیب و فراز ایرانی هرچند گاه یک بار کشورمان، میهنمان مورد تجاوز بیگانگان قرار گرفته و بیشتر آنها کمر بسته بودند که فرهنگ دیرپای و کهن ایرانی را نابود سازند، ولی ملت بزرگ ایران و شما فرزندان خلف کوروش بزرگ آن را دوباره و چند باره زنده کردید. اکنون کشورمان دوره تاریخی بسیار تلخی را می‌گذراند. برکناری و تعویض این رژیم جنایتکار که حقوق تمام شهروندان و هموطنان ایرانی را زیر پا نهاده و با پشتیبانی از تروریسم جهانی، سوء مدیریت و ناتوانی اداره مملکت وضع فلاکتبار اقتصادی برای شما عزیزان فراهم کرد. فقط و فقط با نیروی لایزال ملت و شما مردم ایران امکان پذیر است برکناری و تعویض این رژیم. نیروی شما ملت ایران بزرگترین سپاه و ارتش آزادی خواهی و مردم سالاری تشکیل می‌دهد و هیچ نیرویی در برابر شما تاب مقاومت نمی‌آورد. هیچ یک از گزینه‌های بین‌المللی که در پیش رو نمی‌تواند چاره‌ساز باشد و نمی‌تواند مورد تایید ملت ایران باشد. به بیگانگان که به درستی به دنبال منافع خود هستند دل نبندید و فقط به نیروی خود متکی باشید. به قول حافظ سالها دل طلب جام جذب ما می‌کرد آنچه خود داشت ز بیگانه تمنا می‌کرد. نیروی بزرگ که عاقبت این رژیم را از پای در خار آورد، نیروی لایزال شما ملت، به ویژه نیروی جوانان کشور است. وظیفه ما در خارج از کشور اتحاد هرچه بیشتر نیروهای مبارز برای هماهنگی و راهبردی و هدایت عملیات و کسب پشتیبانی معنوی از دنیای آزاد است که به وسیله شما رژیم را سرنگون خواهد کرد. و این درست کاری است که جبهه هماهنگ مبارزان ایران و کنگره همبستگی انجام داده و میدهد. همان گونه که در 20 سال اخیر بسیاری از ملت‌های تحت ستم توانستند بزرگترین دیکتاتوری ها را به زیر بکشند، شما ملت ایران نیز قادرید که نظام جمهوری اسلامی را که نه مورد تایید ملت ایران است و نه مورد تایید جامعه جهانی است به زیر بکشید. باشد که روان کورش بزرگ از برقراری نظام مردم سالار و حقوق بشر در ایران خوشنود گردد. On behalf of the member of the Iranian Democracy Front, I thank you again for joining us tonight and honor Cyrus the Great, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay. Our next speaker, Dr. Nasre-Esfahani, DDS, Doctor of Dental Surgery. He practices in Houston, Texas. He has more than 30 years of experience in political activities. He's the speaker for Iranian POD organization and a member of the Democracy Front. Please help me welcome Dr. Nasre-Esfahani.
Thank you so much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so delighted to find myself in your company this evening. My thanks and gratitude goes to Dr. Arakandian, who gave me the opportunity to spend some quality time with you all this evening. The title of my speech is Iran and the Middle East Current Strategic Situation. It has been well documented that Iran is one of the oldest civilizations in the world. Together with its resources, population, size, cultural identity, and geographical location, has a very important role not only in the Middle East but in the whole world. It connects two major world's important energy sources, namely the Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf. And by this linkage and connection, it facilitates the transfer of energy from the Caucasus and Central Asia in the north, all the way down to the Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean in the south. Iran, as a Shiite country, finding herself amongst the Sunni populated regional powers in the region, such as Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, has a distinctive role that it can take it just as a positive or a negative standing in the region. Today, because of the massive discovery of the oil and gas resources in Iran, and because of the increased demand of energy in the world, Iran is getting more important every day. We must not forget that historically, Iran has had a considerable presence from the east, from the coast of the Mediterranean Sea to the deserts of Afghanistan and Balochistan in Pakistan, and also from the soaring mountains in the Caucasus to the Indian Ocean and Persian Gulf and Gulf of Oman in the south. And by the same token, today also, its cultural presence and its strategically influenced importance are well established and recognized. Ladies and gentlemen, Iran and Middle East at the present continues to find itself in turmoil and chaos, for it's a blend of inconsistencies and contradictions. While on the whole, the majority of the countries in the region practice Islamic doctrine, nevertheless, there are profound tension and hostility amongst the followers of different fractions of this religion. As an example, Iran's official religion is the Shia branch of Islam, which is the smaller of the two major branches of it, the larger one being the Sunni branch. The present Iranian government claims to be the principal representative of all Muslims in the world. This is in direct defiance with the Sunni populated Saudi Arabia, which through its inherent evolution has come to be the guardian of the holy and sacred places of worship in the Islamic world. Another example would be to consider the minority Alawi regime in Syria ruling over its majority Sunni population, or the minority Sunni government in Bahrain ruling over its majority Shia citizens. In both cases, this had brought about bloodshed and instability. The tribal disputes are another area for unrest and turbulence in the Middle East. Yemen, Jordan, Lebanon are fitting examples of this paradigm. It should be noted here that it was after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, after the First World War, the Great Britain and France occupied and subsequently divided up the region into many countries. Border disputes and claims of rights over ownership or owning an island or a waterway has also been the cause of instability in the region. The war between Iraq and Iran in the northwest of the Persian Gulf was the result of just such claims. Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, and United Arab Emirates and Oman have all similar disputes and claims, which from time to time resurface and add to the volatility in the region. The deficient, flawed, and corrupt economy in the most of these countries, together with unfair and unmerited division of wealth, have also promoted social unrest. The demographic of the region indicates that the Middle East holds one of the world's youngest populations. Nearly 70 to 75% of people are between the age of 14 and 37. And this majority of these people have access to education and training. There is very little opportunity for employment and jobs. Recognition of a bleak and austere future has resulted in a feeling of rebellion and revolt amongst young people. The continuous anti-West rhetoric used by some religious leaders and mullahs has led to hatred and intolerance for the West, and in the particular for the United States of America. As we have witnessed in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and now in Syria, the ongoing rule of the present dictatorship regimes, together with the incessant suppression, has triggered the mass unrest and often ends in riots and ultimately in revolutions. Having identified the cause of the problems facing the Middle East, we have meticulously and scrupulously drawn up a set of proposals. We hope that these solutions are carefully considered by both the Iranian opposition and the international community at large. 1. Contrary to the opinion of the representatives of the European Union, EU, and some of the think tanks in the United States, who believe the answer to the fight against radical religious groups is to replace a dictatorship regime with a moderate Islamist government, we are of the opinion that the current regimes should be replaced by secular government. To resolve the tribal disputes and animosity, it is ill-advised to think that favoring the separatists and helping them to break up their land is the answer. These remedies would only encourage nationalistic sentiments, which in the long run could bring about more widespread conflicts, ethnic cleansing, and racism. We propose to support pro-democracy and liberal groups to assume responsibility in the government, as this should help safeguard civil, constitutional, and human rights for their citizens. To address the border disputes, we propose a dialogue based on the cultural and historical evidence to be set up between concerned countries and monitored under the supervision of the United Nations. It is imperative that the superpowers should avert from taking side and must observe impartiality. To improve the state of the economy in deprived countries of the Middle East, we propose the setting up of an exclusive bank account in which the rich and oil exporting countries of the region should contribute. The financial help should be used to modernize and to standardize the decadent and ill-managed economical programs currently practiced in these countries. The proposed program should be guided by the advanced industrial countries and monitored by the United Nations. It should be noted here that it would be futile and perilous if this help is allowed to be used for politically motivated objectives and intentions, as we have already seen in the case of Qatar, helping Egypt, or Iran helping the Syrian ruling party to remain in power. To help bring about social reforms, we need to be reminded that after 9/11 attacks, the US government became of the belief that the principal cause of such an event is the existence of the dictatorship regime in the Middle East. Subsequently, the US and the European Union, in support of the US, tried to assist the mainstream moderate Islamists to enter the political arena. It was believed that putting these people versus the more radical Islamists would lessen their influence and hold on the people. However, what the US and its allies have come to realize after a decade pursuing such a policy is that one dictator has merely been replaced now by a group of dictators who are just as radical. The recent incident at the U.S. consulate in Libya, which resulted in killing of the U.S. ambassador to Libya, amongst many more victims, is a painful and costly lesson, which must be learned by all involved, and the U.S. should review its current policies. For so long as the U.S. and her allies try to use Islam as a tool for governing the people, not only real and lasting reforms cannot be implemented, on the contrary, it would feed and intensify the current feeling of hatred and repulsion toward the U.S. The U.S. and her allies seem to be satisfied that there are now general elections taking place in Iraq, Libya, Egypt, and consider it a victory. This issue should not be merely bringing about elections. The key question to ask is, what are the types of governments emerging from the ballot boxes? If the U.S. and her allies' sincere aim is to helping bring about peace and security in the region, then we strongly recommend that they should not encourage different tribes or groups to seek separatism. They should not prompt various religious sects to oppose one another. And they should not support or assist the Islamist groups, be it a moderate one or be it a fundamental one. Instead, they should support the pro-secular groups and divisions to bring about democratic and liberal governments. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that Iran, with its unique geographical strategic situation in the Middle East, is the main key for the whole Middle East and the whole world problems. And if we try to change the regime in Iran to a secular, democratic, responsible regime, I believe we can solve most of the world's problems indeed. Thank you so much for listening.
Persian history at the University of British Columbia's Continuing Studies Division, and he's affiliated with a number of world-renowned organizations. Please help me welcome Dr. Kaveh Farouk.
Thank you very much. I was just thinking about how the pen is mightier than the sword, but ideas certainly outlast empires, and that was the first thought I had. I'm certainly not here to idolize Cyrus, but certainly the ideas that he brought with him were far ahead of his time, and they still resonate with us today. So I'm hoping to give a sketch, an overview of some of those ideas that he brought. So what I find interesting about the Achaemenid Empire was that it was the first multinational empire. Again, just going back in time, just going to skip over the migrations of the sort of the Proto-Iranians into the Iranian plateau, and eventually leading into the Medes and the Iranian people, sort of you can see sort of the hatching. And then the first sort of synthesis would be the Median Empire. And it is here where Cyrus the Great himself, of Iranian stock, of course, like the Medes, overthrew his grandfather, King Astyages, whom he treated benevolently. The interesting aspect is that he united Iranians into one kingdom. So when you look at the Persepolis sort of depictions, this is really a union of Medes, Scythians, who used to live in much of Eastern Europe at one point, and the Persians. Now, Lydia is the first place where we see Cyrus in action, if you will. And King Croesus of Lydia was quite famous. He invaded Cappadocia, so he was attempting to outflank Cyrus. So Cyrus counterattacked Sardis. The capital was captured by 547 BC. And this is what I find interesting. Croesus was neither executed nor mistreated, and Cyrus treated him honorably, granted him a high position in his court, and even accompanied Cyrus back to Ecbatana. So he actually this was a very new concept, if you will. I'm going to skip over some of the other aspects, but one legend has it that Croesus was going to set himself on a pyre, and he may have been rescued. What I find interesting is, rather than destruction, Lydian currency was promoted. And the notion of coinage was all of a sudden discovered. And Cyrus pretty much realized the value that this will sort of take away the whole concept of barter. And now this will not only be good for empire-wide business. Later we see Darius the Great really promoting this with the Daric. But now you don't have to import slaves. You can actually pay them in currency. So this was another radical change which led to an explosion of architecture and, of course, commerce and so forth. So moving forward at light speed. Babylon, Gate of Ishtar, if you ever visit the Berlin Museum. Marduk, the god of Babylon, basically had been disrespected, but Nabonidus and so forth. And what happened was a lot of the Babylonians who were disaffected, Gubaru, who had actually been with King Nebuchadnezzar, joined Cyrus. And the interesting thing is, yes, Cyrus militarily moves into Babylon, but again, I'm going to skip over all the military details, but there was a battle at Opis, and then the Sippar fell without a battle, quoting. And this is where it gets interesting, because we're not just talking about the Cyrus cylinder, but the Nabonidus chronicle. So the city of Babylon fell, but again, without a battle. And it wasn't the Persian troops who actually entered, but Gubaru came in on October the 12th. Now, October the 29th, 17 days after Gubaru's arrival, is when Cyrus arrives. And the interesting thing is, when you look at the chronicle, is that he's welcomed as a liberator by the citizens. And the interesting part, not going to quote this verbatim, but the constant references of how, of his arrival and how he basically declared peace throughout the kingdom, and basically he was welcomed and so forth. Messages of greetings to all of Babylon. Now there is some dispute over some of the terms of the translation, but they're pretty consistent. Now the interesting thing is that the Chiropedia, the Encyclopedia of Cyrus by the Greeks, Xenophon, corroborates. So the two sources are corroborating each other. And I'm just going to skip over some of the other. The god Marduk is interesting, because Cyrus actually respected Marduk. So we don't have this emperor coming in and sacking and burning and pillaging. So Marduk, he basically adopted, if you will, as his own god. And now the Cyrus cylinder, it's about this size, if you will. That's yet another document. That's the one that's been most famous in the British Museum. But once again, not getting into too much detail, but constantly sort of a respect for peoples, religions, their ideas, their culture, and so forth, and how he even talks about his love for Babylon, attended daily to his worship of Marduk, for example. And this is what I find interesting. I did not permit anyone of his troops to frighten the people of Sumer and Akkad. Kind of a new concept here. So basically, another aspect which I find interesting is that Marduk is respected. Now, he didn't cite the Zoroastrian supreme entity, Ahura Mazda, but the Babylonian out of respect. So again, a slum clearance program to make sure that the people who were economically hard hit they would be also dealt with in a benevolent manner. The institution of the New Year festival and paying tribute to Marduk again. So racial, religious equality, acceptance. Deported peoples were now allowed to return home. Destroyed temples, ordered to be restored. So again, I'm not going to quote verbatim, but a lot of interesting references. The late Will Durant, for example, compared him a lot to Napoleon, because Napoleon apparently was quite different to different religions and ideas. And again, a lot of interesting references, Phillips and so forth. What you see is, again, the whole notion that local governments are kept in place, and basically just the Pledge of Allegiance, so to speak, tolerance for local customs, institutions. Cotterell, for example, again, he talks about the Cyrus's policy of religious, ethnic, social tolerance, which is probably one of the facets that kept things together. It wasn't so much military force, but intelligent policy, which was good for business too. Now, contrast this with, this is a depiction, I can't remember if this was Nimrod, but one of the depictions. This was the policy of conquerors before Cyrus, is basically harsh treatment, deportations, blinding, basically all of those horrible things that we know of, but Cyrus is different. And this is what I find fascinating. Again, the Persian respect for religious sensibilities. Now, notice the contrast sharply with the Hellenizing policies after Alexander, and which gave rise to the Maccabean revolt. And again, we can talk about Comte Gobineau, for example. Notice again, he did not differentiate between classes or religions, and the Jews were treated in exactly the same way as anybody else. So again, we can have tons of references that I can take all night, but the Cambridge Asian History, for example, but Professor Malawan definitely talks about, and I'll quote, religious toleration was a remarkable feature of Persian rule, and there's no question that Cyrus was the liberal-minded promoter of this policy. So a lot of sources that can corroborate this: Greek, biblical, archaeological finds in Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, Egypt, even Western Anatolia, modern West Turkey. So again, just to go over this at light speed, Mesopotamian commerce, places at Ur and Uruk, they were promoted. For example, the notion of making sure the renting of ships was okay, acquisition of land, sales, and there, again, you see official proclamations. We're not just talking about the Cyrus cylinder, but other documents. And Uruk, for example, again, specific documents talking about the need to protect local citizens, protect their businesses and trades. So in temples, the same type of thing in Ur. We see the moon god, Nana being, again, the temples being restored. We see even there are brooks, basically bricks at Ur, that actually have the inscriptions of Cyrus. So again, we're not just talking about one cylinder that we see in the British Museum. And same type of thing in Uruk. Cyrus builder Vesaglia and Zida, son of Cambyses, great king of Ai. Hebrew source, very interesting. This is the liberation from Babylon. We can go on and on with the Old Testament, but it is interesting. Kourosh, as is cited in the Old Testament, as a Messiah, as Yahweh's anointed in Ezra. Again, we can go on with the Isaiah, he is my shepherd and he shall fulfill all my purpose. And the exiles allowed to return to Israel, it's believed about 40,000 returned. And he supported the Jews in rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem, which came out of the state treasury, which is interesting. But Cyrus also ordered confiscated sort of religious utensils, also returned again in Israel. But Cyrus wasn't a flash in the pan. This policy continued. Darius continued the transfer of religious utensils to Jews. So it didn't end with a lifetime with Cyrus. And again, Darius continues these decrees. The temple continues its reconstruction. And even Artaxerxes continued this policy. So there is a consistency with this policy. And here you see Artaxerxes, again, his name is recalled very positively, Nehemiah and Ezra, but also corroborated by Greco-Roman sources. I'm just thinking of Plutarch, who quotes him, quote, a gentle and noble spirit. But this type of relationship between Jews and Iranians wasn't just at the time of the Achaemenids. The Parthians who succeeded the Achaemenids after they expelled the post-Alexandrian Seleucids, Parthian cavalry, this will surprise you, were welcomed as liberators by Jews in Palestine. Professor Radin really pioneered this work. And get this to move. Oh, okay. There was even, Professor Craven, and I quote, there were Jews who became loyal adherents of the pro-Parthian party. Not very popular with the Romans, I guess. And even the successors of the Parthians, the Sasanians, this is late into Sasanian rule. This was the late Angus MacBride when he was painting for our first book. So this would be Princess Shireen, who was Christian, by the way, and Khosrow II. Now, Khosrow II struck an alliance with Nehemiah ben Hushiel. This is, many of us may not know this, but they were allies. And when the Sasanians moved into, when they very nearly overthrew the Roman Empire, in 619, when they captured Jerusalem, a lot of Jews had actually joined the Persian banner, which is, again, quite interesting. But again, we come back to Malawan. Basically, it seems to go back to Cyrus's ideas. That's why I think ideas are greater than empires. He really, I think he wasn't just idealistic. He probably realized that far more efficient than military force is how you treat the population. Ancient Egypt, again, the Jewish temple at Elephantine was ordered restored. Again, you see letters, correspondences, lots of documentation for this. Fast forwarding. Even Egyptian temples, Temple of Sais or Ammon in Egypt, were also, reconstructed. But just 2 decades before the fall of the Achaemenids to Alexander, in Anatolia, in Lycaea, there was a very interesting document that was found, which is quite fascinating because this was unearthed by French archaeologists. And so this document is in Greek and Lycaean and Aramaic, and almost identical to the Cyrus Cylinder. Get this: respects rights and local populace and endeavors to support their material needs. This is just almost 20 years before Alexander invaded. Cyrus was long gone by then. So this wasn't just some fluke event in history. This became policy. It took root. Ancient Greece, this will surprise us. Ancient Greece, yes. Greeks in Asia Minor were conquered by Cyrus by 480 BC. But we all know that they fought many wars. Mainland European Greeks fought jealously to retain their independence. So, we hear of the battles of Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, Plataea. I'm not going to get into the military details. What's interesting is that despite these wars, the Greeks, yes, held favorable views of Cyrus in their archives. Even Herodotus, who called the father of history in the West, he certainly was not hostile to Cyrus. And he called him, quote, Cyrus was gentle and provided them, the people, with all manner of goods, which is quite fascinating because, again, this is often a hostile view. Xenophon is very, very interesting because he actually wrote an encyclopedia of Cyrus, about eight books. If you visit my website, the English translation is there, and for the Persian speakers, you'll see the Farsi or Persian translation is also, you can access. Now, Alexander, this will surprise you. Yes, he went on what I call a rock and roll tour, very destructive of the Persian Empire, but when it came to Pasargad, he paid great respect. He even repaired the tomb. He was very respectful of Cyrus. And we can find this in many Greek sources, Arrian, Quintus, Curius, and so forth. The tomb was restored. So, again, to put a long sort of story short, he was very sensitive to Cyrus's name. He spared the frontier post of Kourosh, which had been founded by Cyrus, known as Hierapolis in Greeks. Ancient Rome remembered Cyrus. Scipio Africanus had a copy of the Cyropaedia. Surprising, eh? What about Julius Caesar? He too had a copy of the Cyropaedia. So the legacy resonated well into Rome, but much further. Europe. Shah Abbas's post-Islam, I find it very interesting, but this is a European portrayal, but I'm just going to go, again, light speed. Persodian Rex, the king of Persia. There were a lot of battles that Persia and Europe were allies. Actually, people don't know that. This is I believe, the Duca of Venice, or the Persian ambassadors. They were quite honored. In Paris, they were often given a tumultuous welcome. You see the sort of the flag with the line in the sun. And this is Reza Beg being entered. I think that looks like a sort of a Versailles depiction. Shakespeare was probably influenced by these Zoroastrian thoughts, but I'm skipping over a lot of this. Shah Abbas built a lot of churches unknown in the West, many of which still stand today. This is the Armenian population. But this is what I find interesting here. Mnemona Cyrus. In Latin, the memory of Cyrus. Interesting how the Europeans would make reference in sort of the 16th, 17th century to the memory of Cyrus. Was it because of his benevolence to the Christians? Many are not aware that Shah Abbas and actually the Safavids were, many of these churches still stand today, many of them. So in Europe, John Locke, I'm not going to get into the philosophy, but he was one of the liberal thinkers, fascinating. He was cognizant of the Cyropaedia. He knew of the Cyropaedia, which might explain the parallels between the philosophies, his philosophies, and Cyrus's Zoroastrian doctrines. But this is the icing on the cake for me. The Founding Fathers. Now, this is one of my favorite paintings. Thomas Jefferson had 2 copies of the Cyropaedia. I haven't seen those myself, but one of my students who actually came to DC a few years ago told me that he saw the initials TJ actually on them. Fascinating. One of my favorites, Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation. I find parallels between Abraham Lincoln and Cyrus. And of course we know of the 13th Amendment 2 years later in 1865. Both fought wars, that's true. But Cyrus liberated the Jews, and he also was benevolent over pretty much everywhere he went. And Abraham Lincoln, he had to fight to preserve the Union. But he also was very enlightened because he saw through. He was a man. He was like kind of like Leonardo da Vinci. Well, he realized the utility of, he knew that slavery was doomed, and he liberated a whole portion of the humanity of the United States of America. So this was really the first world empire, the Achaemenid Empire, going back into the past. This multilingual, multinational empire. And what's interesting about Persepolis, you see Indians, Ionian Greeks, Africans, Assyrians, Babylonians, maybe they're Babylonian, but that's right, Lydians. Now, Kourosh actually argues that gentleman is probably Jewish. Coming back again to the Jews and the legacy, this is in sort of my wife's hometown in Hamadan, and there's some interesting pictures. This is repeatedly the tomb of Esther and Mordecai. Might be from Sasanian times, but it's very interesting because it's more like a keep than a castle. It's like a castle kind of turned inward. Very interesting. Tomb of Daniel in Khuzestan. Despite, whatever, political efforts, people will go to this tomb. And it's not a brick is touched. But this is what I find interesting. Just before I came, one of my students found this picture, which I couldn't resist. I had to put it in. This is in Israel, and you'll see a street called Cyrus Street. Cyrus Street in Israel. My feelings exactly. Long overdue that we see this side of events. So Zoroaster was the, I don't know if Cyrus was really Zoroastrian, but the ideas were certainly there because the Mithraic cults was really where Zoroaster came from. But basically, the notion of a single all-powerful God, Ahura Mazda stood for all that is good, and the opposition of good versus evil, almost Manichaean. Truth is good word, good deed, good thoughts, and the Achaemenids saw themselves as instruments of Ahura Mazda, and no forced conversions. So we can end with this. Belief in a heavenly afterlife for good people and torment the evildoers may have been partly responsible for the moral treatment that the Achaemenid kings accorded subject nations. I would add, it was also good business. So basically, in a nutshell, we've gone over a vast area. But I think some of these images certainly speak loudly that the legacy of Cyrus is still with us, up to the founding fathers and even today. Thank you very much.
I think we all need to take his course. As you can see, it's very interesting. Our next speaker is a professor of world religions, diplomacy, and conflict resolutions. And he teaches at George Mason University. He's a published writer, and his research is found in many books and journal articles. Please welcome Dr. Mark Gopin.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and welcome to my city. I lived in Washington for many years now. I'm a Bostonian originally. But I understand tonight how many of you are guests coming from many other parts of the country and also parts of the world. So it's an honor to be here. I'm really humbled by that amazing lecture. I am a professor. I listen to professors all the time, and that was top of the line. And I just really, just amazing. Also, the capacity to manage a great deal of information and actually make it intelligible is something that the Academy rarely does. So I'm just really, really grateful. And I just want to, just a few brief comments on that, building on some of the things that the Professor Kaba mentioned. And my field, just by way of introduction, my field is relatively new. It's 30 to 40 years old. Conflict analysis and resolution is a hybrid drawing upon political science and sociology and anthropology, and also studies of religions. And it basically is an analysis of the deeper roots of why conflicts happen, why violent conflicts happen, why they persist, and particularly violence, the nature and roots of human violence, and also how and eventually when they go away, and when they dissipate, and where we stand in relationship to that. Not only, I've written most of my books specializing in the relationship between religion and violence, and religion and peace, all religions. And at the same time, my background comes out of philosophy and ethics and Jewish philosophy and ethics, but I switched into this field many, many years ago. and I'm also a practitioner. And so I work in Palestine, in Israel, in Syria for many years, and have deep relationships and work in Afghanistan, and also with some Iranian projects as well. And I think that one of the things that fascinates me, I have this deep and unnatural, strange love for Persian culture. It doesn't make any sense in terms of my genetics. It comes solidly from Ukrainians and Latvians back in Europe, but for sure my ancestors were in Persia 2,500 years ago, made a short stop there on the way from Babylonia when the Jews were exiled. And so just half a year ago when I was in Qatar for a conference and I was looking just over the water, and I really felt like it was home, and like there was something there that was drawing me. And I really do long to go back and work inside Iran, not just virtually the way I am now, but actually work there. I think that one of the challenges of looking at the genius of Cyrus and the way in which he was so ahead of his time is to try and understand the phenomenon of the great man of history in its relationship to historical change, in its relationship to philosophy and religion, and social organization and politics. In many ways, we all sense that sometimes a man comes along in history, or a human being comes along, and they have this capacity, and we see it sometimes among great presidents and politicians, they have this capacity that each person they meet is the center of their attention. And they value that person and embrace that person's culture and philosophy and life as if that was everything in the room. And then they move on to others. And that's a truly great president. And we've had some presidents in this country once in a while who had that capacity. And they have this capacity, and they're almost felt to be a father as a result. A lot of what we study in conflict analysis actually is influenced by psychology and psychoanalysis of the relationship between leadership and the led, the leader and the led. Many leaders in history and many leaders today build their leadership in a very weak way on the weaknesses of people, on making people regress, on actually bringing out the worst in people, on emphasizing a dualistic universe in which there's us versus them. And therefore, you need to stay with me because everything around you is dangerous, and I'll protect you, and the rest of everybody is evil. And that is very effective in politics. It's very effective in history. And what's amazing about Cyrus is how different he was from the Babylonian Empire and from the Assyrian Empire that had just, from the sources that I know very well in terms of Isaiah and the ancient biblical sources, is just how massive an impact he had, not only on the Greeks, but also on the Jews, who were, after all, very cagey, very battered and beaten by many more powerful empires, from the Egyptians to the Assyrians to the north. Comes along this man, and Isaiah in chapters 40 to 55 is a second Isaiah, was clearly in Persia or Babylonia. He not only respects Kourosh, but makes him into this Messiah figure, this servant of God, ideal servant of God. And very cutely, in some ways, the prophet says, and he doesn't know my name yet. He's speaking in the name of Jehovah. He says, he doesn't know my name yet, but he's going to. And there's that real enthusiasm that, Kourosh is coming to us. And that sense that this man is for us. And Kourosh managed to do that for everyone. So that's the mark of leadership that was way ahead of its time in understanding the basis, essentially, of nonviolent governance of the planet. One of the hardest things, one of the most challenging things we're facing today in conflict analysis and resolution is, when do things get really bad and when do they improve? And it's the tendency of the academia and the left and progressives, and I am a progressive, is to say everything is bad, it's getting worse, you need to give us money to make positive change. And we move along like that. It's a disaster. And I tend to focus on disastrous places. I focus on Syria. I focus on Palestine. And it can be very depressing. And now I focus on Iran. And it's very depressing to look at the nature of that regime. At the same time, the overall trend of the last 500 years of history is much, much more on a series of trends that are exactly what Cyrus instituted 2,500 years ago. And that is the notion of taking everyone's individual interests seriously. The notion of honor versus shame. The idea that gentle commerce, where everyone benefits, actually transforms history. All of these are the elements of nonviolence that are increasing in human history. The fact is that what we saw in the picture of the Babylonians and the impaling and the killing and the skinning alive, these are horrible realities of history, both secular and religious. Both secular regimes and fascistic regimes have done this, and very religious institutions have done this throughout history. But slowly and steadily, in the last 400, 500 years, there's been an increasing sense of empathy and sympathy with people who are utterly different from us. It's easy to love your family. It's easy to love your race. It's easy to love members of your religion as long as they do exactly what you want them to do. It's very hard to worship and admire somebody who's completely different, who has bizarre forms of worship. And to not only accept their forms of worship, but to make it front and center. To say, oh, today is Babylonian Day. I'm going to worship Marduk. Unbelievable. Unbelievable, the pragmatism of it. I've come to really admire Iranian culture in the last year of my intensive research and practice. And one of the things that is the saving grace, and I believe will be the future of Iran, is this radical pragmatism. This radical sense of what to do when, in order for everyone's interest to be satisfied. And I spent a lot of time in Damascus, and there is a subclass of people in Damascus who are very similar. Practical, pluralistic, cosmopolitan, and they're just sitting there aghast at their regime, but having to cooperate at the same time. And there are many, many people inside Iran who are stuck in the same position. This genius of culture, of Cyrus, is still there. It's still there. The challenge, historically speaking, is that the great man history, the great man theory of history, is very unreliable. You know, you can have a man like Cyrus, but then you can have an Assyrian leader who comes to Israel or Palestine and he says, you know, I think I'm going to take every single group and put them exactly on the opposite land from what they come from. And that's what they used to do. They used to trade populations in order to demoralize everyone. And we know from conflict analysis research that the best way to make everyone depressed, suicidal, drunk, killing their own families, hurting their own families, is to put them on a plot of land that they don't know what to do with. I'm not talking about business people. Business people survive very well everywhere. But the average farmer, you know, you put him off his land, he goes crazy. And so they used to deliberately do this. And the Assyrians did that, the Babylonians did that. And Cyrus comes along and says, no, on the contrary, I'm going to make everyone feel exactly comfortable. And by the way, I like that coin you're using. Can you tell me more about it? You know, in other words, that radical pragmatism, honor, respect, and mutual interest in taking advantage of other opportunities. These are the foundations of conflict resolution practice at the advanced levels of the academy today. It's empathy, sympathy, honor, relational bonding. It's the pragmatism of gentle commerce, which from Immanuel Kant on, it's the embrace of the rule of law, going across cultures, from Grotius and others. What Europeans and Westerners tend to not understand is that they think they own that. And they don't realize that the seeds and the nuclei of this have been there for thousands of years in many cultures. Even in eastern Syria, there was an ancient town called Dura Europos. And what impressed me about Dura Europos thousands of years ago is that it's better planned than London and Paris. It's better planned for pluralism. Because in the center of the street, you have everything mapped out, and you have 3 churches and two temples to Zeus and a synagogue, and they're all laid out geometrically. That's very different than the European cities, where basically what happened is that grudgingly, the Catholics got a space, and the Jews got a space, and this one got his, now there are mosques, and it's all very haphazard, because really it was only just supposed to be us. And thousands of years ago, right in this region, there were already a notion of purposeful pluralism, purposeful engagement with the diversity of culture. And that is the foundation of humanity. It's the foundation of progress. It's the foundation of peaceful transformation of humanity. We don't have today Cyrus types. The world isn't constructed for empires. Empires also come and go. But the fact is that our international documents, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, like the basic notions of Bill of Rights of democratic institutions. These are our embodiments of Cyrus's ideals. This is the way in which we are institutionalizing the genius of people, of unique men in history like Cyrus, who were way ahead of their time, who were beloved by people who were even their enemies, and therefore bonded humanity in a way that humanity had never been bonded before. This is what the hope of humanity is. And the historical realities, the statistics of war and violence indicate very clearly that in the last 400 years we've been moving in the right direction, and in the last 50 years we've been moving astonishingly fast towards a less and less violent planet because of these institutions, because of the capacity to know the other, because of the rule of law across cultures and civilizations that are embodied in documents of human rights, because of these institutions that Cyrus foresaw over 2,000 years ago. The question, the agonizing question for all of us, and especially people in this room, is what about the spots that are not moving? What about the spots that have actually regressed? Because you know in statistics, you can be moving in the right direction, and then you can have other spaces that are cancerous, that are moving in the wrong direction. Very bad spaces, like in Damascus right now, the tragedy unfolding there, like in the Iranian regime and so on. That's where we have to do some very serious thinking about how Cyrus got people from A to B. Certainly he was a military warrior. Certainly he was brilliant at what he did as a warrior. But he also had the vision that I've noticed once in a while. In very senior, I work constantly in Israel, and I work a lot with the Pentagon and with State Department. And you see generals and you see people at Intel who really understand pluralism. They really understand that their troops and their interests are better served by really working with the others wherever possible, building alliances. And the biggest tragedy we know of in terms of Syria right now in the last year, and I'm working very closely on the ground with the opposition, is a disorganization and a lack of solidarity. Solidarity between peoples who are in opposition requires enormous tolerance, enormous acceptance of difference, in order to create that unity of purpose that really helps move civilizations to overcome small-minded people, small-minded religious fanaticism, small-minded petty corruption. All of these things stand in the way of enlightened self-interest that builds civilizations. And what we know is that that nonviolent process of building solidarity among oppositions is the key to social change that's lasting. It's much more complicated to create messy alliances with this group that wants to kill for you and that group that wants to invest in this and that, because everybody in a region has their own interests, and God knows, before you know it, people are destroying your country. And I've seen this happen in Syria, I've seen this happen in Palestine, and many, many places. So what we need to do today is to really understand the genius of Cyrus, and to take that genius and make it into the kind of policies that we can adhere to that would add up to the same results: engagement with the other, standing up against things that are wrong, and at the same time creating a unity of purpose, common interests in commerce, honor wherever possible among differences, and then moving forward to catch up with the rest of history that's moving into more and more enlightened and democratic institutions. So I'm very honored to be among you. I celebrate your culture, I celebrate your country, and I can only wish, and this is coming out of my clerical role, I heard the musician talking about Hafez, who I love, and Rumi, who I love, is that I want to bless you with the kind of nonviolent future and the enlightened civilization that Iran really deserves to be as a beacon for the rest of the world. I know it's there, we all know it's there, and it's just a matter of time and unity of purpose for that to be unleashed in history and really create a revolution in the entire region that Iran finds itself in. Thank you very much.
Gopin. Sorry we kept you here so late. One more time, we're going to hear wonderful, lovely voice of Amiko and her husband, Anna. Thank you.
Hello again, sorry. Yeah, last piece is called Sweet for Peace. And for many years I was pondering and meditating, thinking about offering as a musician for the global peace. And this piece we are hearing is a result of about 7 years really thinking and putting my heart to see as a musician how I can dedicate something for the global peace. And especially as in this crucial time in Iran, you know, and I think that is appropriate, this piece. And we are offering gratitude with all our heart. This piece, we hope that one day we can see whole world living in peace and harmony and love. This piece composed in 7 different stages, if I can say, track. It starts very gently, it's built up. In track 5 is the March of Peace, and it's very powerful. And 7 track is Angel coming, the choir. I use the children chorus of Washington. There are 70 kids and pronounce the word peace in different language, so you will hear. So this is a journey, and I hope we can go together to do this journey.